Again, Internet. Nice to see you again. So, once again on this fine overcast day, on this little sojourn across part of the world, I am bringing you the hammer of the gawds. And no, I don't mean the hammer of the gods, Led Zeppelin, and their song. I mean the hammer of the gawds, said with a thick, certain kind of accent. God. The incredulous disbelief coming down upon their heads like a mighty hammer. So, what exactly am I talking about? Is this another meandering thoughts video? Well, I guess you'll just have to watch out and find out. See what it is and what it isn't. Could it be that it is? Could be. There are always probabilities, both ways, and a third way. It's going to go up, down, or sideways, right? So, as we travel through life and through time, consider that we are all time travelers moving forward on the chronology timeline. And consider that there are some facts in the world that we know of, and in the universe that we live in. One of those facts is that math matters. What do I mean by that? Sneezing also matters, by the way. Well, math is a very powerful tool. It lets us gauge and measure. It lets us quantify. It gives us a qualitative comprehension. Math, when done correctly, does not lie. In a non-metaphysical world, in a world of practical physics, chemistry, biology, and other sciences, in a world where something as simple as basic arithmetic works the way you learned it in school, it is a fact that math is a very useful skill and a very useful science. Without it, well, we would in many ways be lost. Try navigating your way around any town or city without math. Could you do it by heart? Is it easier with numbers? Consider the alternatives. Without measurable, calculable ways of quantifying things, it would be very often harder to find your way around. If you couldn't measure which way is up or down or sideways, how would you get around? If you didn't know which way is left and right, how would you get around? Frontwards or backwards? How would you get around? Now you can say to me, well, in space, there are no up, down, or sideways, front, right, left, back, whatever. Yeah. And so you need to consider other ways of moving. X-axis, Y-axis, Z-axis, and then fourth dimension and fifth dimension and so on. Still, those are measurable things. And you could say to me, well, but those measurable things are all relative. To which I say, well, they may be relative. So are the laws of relativity. Again, in a world of practical physics, math matters. And, arguably, to whatever extent, in a world of quantum physics, math matters. Because even if you can have two particles representing one, but one particle in two places at once, the math still matters. I know. Oh, God. God, this is getting deep. Yes, so deep. It's another reason that it's good to be at least competent with skills, at least mathematically literate. You don't have to be Laplace. You don't have to be, some great mathematician of the ages, or even one of the top people at math in your own age. What you need to be able to read the maths and understand how to make the most of them. You don't necessarily need to get lost in all of the tiny details, but at least have a basic comprehension. Now I know most of you have probably gone through some level of education, and so this seems quite obvious. Which I say, things which seem obvious to you may or may not be obvious to others. For it is known that there are many people who are A, mathematically illiterate, and B, don't see the value in being mathematically literate. And that is sad, because people who don't see the value in mathematical literacy are often the people who are most left behind in society, especially in a society that continuously develops and evolves over time. Why? Because as society develops and evolves over time, well, numbers become increasingly important. How? Why? What makes you say this? Well, consider that in the beginning of human society, there was little math, if any. People could maybe use their hands and feet to count, maybe. But did it even occur to them? And of course the answer is math, as a science, was developed by humans, not on the very first day that humans existed, but rather later, many thousands of years later, even hundreds of thousands of years later, by what are comparatively, relatively modern humans, just some thousands of years ago. So for most of humanity's existence, people have been living without proper math. Again, they may have been able to count certain things, and obviously they did, because going back, 50,000 years, 100,000 years, we can see relics of human civilization, or human beings, and the works they left behind, whether they be wall art in caves, or pottery, or anything, fire pits, okay? All kinds of tools they made. Those things took a great deal of skill, especially when you consider that they didn't have power tools to make these things. They didn't have easy access to paintbrushes, etc. Yet somehow they fabricated what they needed to accomplish the deeds that they accomplished. Whether they made sharp stones to hunt animals, or nets to trap them, or spears to fight off attackers, whatever it might be, skills were needed. And skills that, frankly, very often required math. Primitive math, maybe. Pre-math, if you will. Math before it was a thing. Nevertheless, math. And as civilization evolved a little bit, and human beings developed some math skills, became more evident than ever. And as math developed, so too did our abilities to use them in our day-to-day lives. So, you might have counted how many seashells you had to trade for a loaf of bread, or how many, how many bushels of wheat you might trade. buckets of milk, or whatever it might be. The advantage of counting and measuring has given us tremendous advantages as a people. And by people, I mean as a species, Homo sapiens, humans. Other animals also display some ability to count things. Dogs, otters, seals, you name it. Practically, well, a very wide number of animals actually can do some limited sort of counting. How do we know this? We've measured it. We can see how certain animals, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, other monkeys and apes, squirrels, we can see how they're able to calculate or count very basic things that are important to them. Whether it's how much food they're gathering, how many objects are in their way, whatever it might be. There is no shortage of examples of animals of all types using maths to better their life. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, gosh, this is just so gosh darn silly. Tell me something I don't know, Yasha. Well, again, what may seem obvious or silly to you may not be to others. It may not be so obvious to everybody that your average house dog is able to count certain things, is able to count certain numbers. It may not be so obvious to you that otters or beavers or cats or mice can count certain things. Well, maybe you've watched documentaries and you know these things. Maybe you've studied it in a lab. Maybe you've learned it by experience. Maybe you learned it by reading. But again, there are many people who simply don't know these things. And again, why is that devastating, if at all? Well, because again, the power of math has given human beings an incredible advantage over other animals that do not have our math skills. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we're able to do things like build, right? Innovate on a regular basis, far more than our animal counterparts. Right? Yes, I realize opposable thumbs help us a great deal. But how many houses do you see built out of concrete, made by raccoons, or chimpanzees, or gorillas, or orangutan? And the answer is 0. How many cars do you see made by mice, or squirrels, or sugar gliders? All of these creatures have some basic form of counting. It may be well beneath our forms of counting. However, they are able to. Yet, not at the level which we can. And that level which we have achieved continues to evolve over time. Again, this has given us a strategic and measurable advantage over other creatures that simply cannot count as well as we can. So, what is the purpose of this message? The purpose of this message is simply to encourage you, if you're not a person who is very fond of math, to encourage you to learn a little bit about math. Maybe read a math textbook. I know, it doesn't sound very exciting at first. Maybe read something half a level higher than what you've attained so far in your math skills. Why? Simply to advance your own abilities. And you might say, but I find math boring and I never use it. Well, I have to disagree. If you think you never use math, you certainly do. If you've ever paid for anything, you've used math. At least if you actually bother to do the counting of how much you're paying for something, then you've used math. And by the way, even if you never did the counting, but you knew that you were using someone else's money, like a rich relative, father, mother, brother, sister, child, whatever, and you depended on someone else for your payments, you still had to calculate the probabilities that the person that is paying for you will willfully do so for however long you think they will do so. Right? Because nothing is absolutely free. Yes, you might get complete and total expenses paid by some generous benefactor, but there will be a price at some point. Or you might get cut off at some point. You need to know when that will be. That's math. You need to know what the price is. That's math. You need to know what your options are and be able to count them and list them, write them down, memorize them, whatever, comprehend them. You need to be able to quantify the risks, the potential probabilities of your gravy train running out. All of that requires math. Do you tie your shoelaces? Math. You might say it doesn't include math, but it does. Dexterity, hand-eye, brain coordination requires math. Knowing where to place your fingers to tie the shoelaces requires math. Oh, you use Velcro or sandals. You never tie shoelaces? Well, that requires math too. How much Velcro do you need to pull through the strap, through the hole, to make it fit you properly and snug so the shoe doesn't fall off your foot? You only wear thongs and sandals that don't have any kind of tie. Still requires math. How far do you put your foot into the sandal before it starts to hurt? That's math. You may not count the numbers, but you are moving your feet measurable millimeters or centimeters or inches. How many times can your dog bark before it starts to annoy people? That's math. There's no shortage of math in the life. And on that note, we'll carry on later. Happy counting.